Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Divorce Unplugged podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something interesting. What happens to the kids? What happens to the kids in a divorce or in a custody battle? I'm your co-host, Nicole Cox. You might recognize me as the family law liaison on all the socials. And I have a co-host.
Hey everybody, Keegan Burke. You may recognize me as Divorceology on all the socials. I'll hit you with my disclaimer or disclosure.
Yeah.
Not an attorney, not legal advice, not lawyering, certainly not your lawyer. Here to have a well versed conversation about all of these topics on Divorced Unplugged, and glad to be here.
And I too agree with everything he says on his disclaimer. I am, however, an attorney, but I am not your attorney. And right now, we are not giving legal advice. And I am also a custody and divorce coach. And we do real talk here.
Let's get into it. So, let's talk about all of the places that people may be aware or may not be aware. Um, the kids are impacted, right? Where are the primary things, or what are the primary things that we need to think about when it comes to kids in this generally contentious environment of divorce, separation, custody, etc.? And where are they impacted? And so the places that we can start off talking about are what do we see in behaviors, and why might we see them, and how do we navigate that?
Right. Well, I do have several clients that have children, obviously, that they're dealing with custody or divorce. And I think where you see the impact the most is if a younger child, mostly younger because they're easily modeling behavior, have been witness to domestic violence. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think it's one every parent should be doing their absolute best to avoid exposing their children of any age to that type of scenario, without a doubt, right? I see or hear or have had arguments around all kinds of things related to children's behavior. And it's an interesting one because it's generally pretty subjective. And let me give you an example.
Mhm.
Right? You see arguments being made all the time where, well, the child was at so and so's parent, they came home and they were uh, poorly behaved, they had bad manners, or they
Mhm.
were overly emotional. And here's the challenge with that, right? In one vein, it could be that they're having a negative experience with that parent. That's a real possibility. But
Right.
equally possible, and in my world, more often the scenario is they're struggling with the fact that they're leaving the parent they want to be with, and they don't know how to process that emotion. And so maybe they're acting out, maybe they're overloaded mentally, maybe they're struggling with the new parent because that's not really where they want to be or where they're most comfortable.
Right.
And so it's a really tough thing, but there are things that you want to keep an eye out for. But most importantly, when the kids are in your care, you're making sure they're not experiencing the things that could create behavioral problems or be stressors on your kids, right?
Right. I mean, I think there's a point where it's normal for them to come back and have a transition phase. It's like, transitioning from one house to the other has to be difficult. So I think there's some behaviors, and I'm going to ask you actually, Keegan, what do you think is a normal transitional, like just kind of bad behavior versus what you think would be definitely a red flag, there's a problem, there's help needed.
Yeah, that is a fantastic. This is a great topic because I think every parent experiences this. And I have a couple folks who have absolutely fantastic co-parenting relationships. They've
Right.
got a perfect parenting plan if you think about it. They get along, they communicate, they do things together. The children, even in those situations, have
Mhm.
a transition experience, right? It's a
Right.
different environment they're going to. So natural would be maybe a little bit moody, maybe a little bit more frustrated. Maybe they don't listen so well. They're
Mhm.
getting used to their new environment, and that can take some time. And I generally say, rule of thumb, give them 24 hours to settle in. Right, it takes some time for them to kind of work through that transition. The things that you want to look out for are, the black and whites, right? Physically harming themselves, physically harming other people,
There you go.
doing weird sexually motivated things that are a little bit like that's not a normal behavior for a child of whatever age they are.
Yeah.
Because those are indicators, right? Those are things that you're like, hey, wait a second. This isn't what a child normally exhibits in even a frustrated state.
Right. So yeah, so I have an interesting story for you, and I'll just get some, background from you on what you think. One of my clients has a 4-year-old little boy, and he was a witness to several incidences of maybe the police coming to the house 4 times. Dad finally was put in jail for domestic violence. For, I think I've talked about it before on the podcast, for snatching the tiny baby out of mom's arms. This child has seen quite a bit. So, most recently, he's gone into school and started hitting people with objects. He has gotten up in the teacher's face and actually scared her to the point where teacher had to call mom and let mom know what was going on. And then most recently, the baby they have that's like 1.5 2 years old, he took one of his projects and smashed it over her head.
Eh, So, it, at first blush, not knowing all the details, my feeling there is that is suggestive that there's a certain level of aggression that either he's experienced, seen, or is feeling, and probably needs to have some level of professional underwriting.
Right.
Um,
Right.
for sure, right? I mean, again, though, remember, for in my mind, kids are going through all kinds of weird things and doing weird things, and but maybe that's the other point, right? What are we doing? And again, no, so there are so many unknowns in my position at this point, but like, how are we navigating these behavioral things? Is this just a purely behavioral experience? Is this every time? But
Mm.
I
I
would
think
say,
you're
hey,
right. You're
there's a
right.
light blinking, right? There's definitely a light blinking.
Yeah, there's a light blinking. There's even more incidences but think about if it had been like a chair that he had hit the baby over the head with.
Right.
Now we've got a huge problem, right?
Right.
So in my coaching, I suggested that we get, and he had been in therapy. And so just to give you a little bit of information behind that, he had been in play therapy and some therapies. And finally, the counselor said, I cannot help him. This is too high conflict of a situation, and he needs to go to a forensic. And then
Wow.
in that, yeah. So now we've got a 4-year-old that needs to go to a forensic psychologist to get help. So the kicker on this, and then we can move past it, is that when mom, who has 100% legal, said, okay, let's get him to a forensic and I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it out of pocket. And father would not agree to it, and the forensic could not still take the child, even though she had 100% legal decision making.
How does that work?
So apparently, in that state, which I didn't understand it either, they have to at least have the other parent agree. Why, I don't know. And I think it'll be interesting to see. And I will get you guys caught up when they actually go to court, because I think a judge should definitely say to him, this father, like, why would you not, in the best interest of your son, get him forensics? He wanted to force safe haven and all the places that nobody can get notes and use in court.
Yeah, and which takes us to the whole topic of, legal custody, decision making, and how often this is a challenging experience
Very true.
for maybe the proactive parent
Right.
or the reactive parent. But again, it's one of those very sticky topics, at least through my perspective, and that is it's really difficult to make a good argument to keep your kid out of therapy and it's really difficult to make a good argument to force them into therapy. Um,
Right.
and I say that because, I mean, we all know that there are plenty of really crappy therapists out there,
Right.
and kids are a unique beast, and there are very few really good kid therapists, lots of good adult therapists, right?
Right.
But, when you go search the boards, there are not a lot that focus
Or you
on.
can't get in. If
Right,
it if they're
that's right.
good, you can't get into them.
By the way, a lot of those therapists are focused on, like, mental personality disorders, things that they're trying to work through, not necessarily supporting their effort of just navigating divorce and
Mhm.
custody and the emotional experience that kids are going through. So it's in my mind, therapy is, I'm an advocate for it cautiously.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. If my kids were, if mom said, "Hey, I want to put them in therapy," then listen. At the end of the day, it's going to be a hard thing to say no if there's a legitimate
Right.
reason to do it, and you're going to look like an idiot arguing against it.
I think so, and that's where
Right?
my client is definitely in the right because at least try anything you can in the best interest of your child,
I
you know?
I also think that there's, not all the time, but there's probably a greater likelihood that the person opposing therapy is opposing it because of what could potentially be
Oh,
said to that therapist.
and that's 100% the reason why he won't sign and let that child go to forensic counseling is
Yep.
because he knows it's gonna end up in court.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. But okay, so let's talk about behaviors. So what do you think about, and you see them in school as well.
Mhm.
And what does the teacher do? I think when we talk about behaviors, maybe their schooling, their grades go down. They can be depressed. Depending on their age group, they may even feel like the divorce is their fault. I've
Yep.
seen that quite a bit. So, will
School,
you
I think,
intervene with a
is,
school counselor?
yeah, school counselor, I think, is a great, it's in their existing environment.
That's what I think.
These counselors, I like them a lot because they know how to kind of work into their day to day, right? These
Mhm.
counselors, they're seeing on a relatively regular basis in and around the campus. Um, Again, legal custody, the other parent has to sign off on it. And so
That
it can get sticky and difficult, but from a pure strategic standpoint, right? If you're going to be the person that's opposing therapy and counseling, and there are behaviors and actions that your kid is exhibiting, and
Mhm.
you're opposing a relatively reasonable pursuit of helping them,
Right.
that's a really bad strategic move.
Very bad,
Um, and
very
so
bad.
ultimately, you should be supportive of it, but you should also be very conscious of, what is potentially at play. Because, those therapists and those counselors are experiencing those kids in their own environment. And listen, kids speak the truth generally, right? And
Yeah.
when they're in a place where they feel like they're safe and they can open up, they're
Mhm.
going to say it the way it is. And that is probably why most people are not wanting to have those therapies and counselors involved.
Oh, it is absolutely 100% the reason why they will say no to therapy. Which brings me to another situation. So we talked about the schools, emotions, therapy. What about when a child has to now go into another household where mom or dad has partnered?
So this is a good one, and I talk about it a lot, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it. Not even just you and I; everybody has an opinion about this. Um, and let me say that there are definitely exceptions to this, but I am a big believer that with right timing, with right circumstance, the other party has every right and every expectation to have a new partner in their
Mhm,
life.
mhm.
Hopefully they're making a good sound decision that's going to be good for them and good for your kids. You
That
want the other person to be happy, right? That's ideal.
mhm.
Um And I get frustrated with the folks that I don't want so and so around my kids. I don't want them to meet the new partner, the new girlfriend. And listen, there are plenty of scenarios where they shouldn't and they can't, right? They marry, would get with a felon or a criminal or a bad actor or whatever.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's like that's their life over there. This is our life over here. If I get with somebody else, then I'm hopefully making a good choice, responsible, stable, kind, supportive, loving person in my household, just as I hope, she would do the same.
Okay, so
So,
I'm gonna play devil's advocate just a little
mhm,
bit. So what happens if, because I have a situation that I'm gonna share in a minute. So what happens if you partner with somebody, get engaged, live with someone, and suddenly your child or children just absolutely fear that person? They're not happy around them. In fact, they're frightened by them and they feel like they're being threatened. What would you do in that scenario?
yeah. So, I mean, again, though that lands in that kind of exception world.
Well, I
Um,
see them all the time. My clients land in the exception world. They do.
Yeah, well, in those cases, I think it's case by case, but probably some level of Here's the point: you have to document what's happening. You have to be able to establish a pattern. You have to be able to exhibit, show that this is having a negative impact on your child. You
Mhm.
can't just disagree with who they've picked. Maybe it's your best friend, but that's not enough to say they can't be around your kids and they can't be with your ex. It's really something where there's got to be a really clear uh, path or evidence showing that this is something that is the result of that new party. But generally
Okay,
speaking,
that's interesting. Yeah. So, okay, yeah. But now you have documentation that this person is actually abusive to two girls.
mhm,
And now, it's like what happens to the kids? So they are now having to go over to that house more than 50%, and all of a sudden some things start to happen, and one of the children, who's more of a teenager, gets a DVRO against dad's fiance, and dad's living with her. Now do you see how, like, the children are totally in the middle?
yeah,
And it's hard for everybody, I'm sure, but dad took the fiance's side and said he would not speak to the girls or see them until they dropped the DVRO, which they have their own attorney. So, I mean, again, outside of the box things, but these are some situations that happen, and one of the children is like 7 or 8 years old. So she wasn't very old. And, the other person was abusive and mean. So,
well,
like you said, you've got to make good choices, I guess is what I'm saying. Parents, really vet people out and make good choices when you repartner because your kids are the ones that are going to be hurting.
y- oh, yes, and so I think that's a very muddy, very ugly situation. But I think that kids are. I don't even think we need to get to that level of extreme to be considerate of how the other party can impact a household.
Right.
Whether it's having, conversations with that person that are negative about the other party, whether it's degrading them. I've got plenty of those storylines, right? In my own world where, there are things that
Mhm.
come back and I'm like, I cannot believe those are the conversations being had in their presence or being said to them. But at the end of the day, the those are like case by case subjective
Right.
scenarios where you have to determine one, have you done a good enough job establishing a relationship with your child so that when they go into those tough environments, they can navigate it? They have the emotional capacity, the tools to do it, where maybe they've got a strong enough relationship where the other party can't impact it in a negative way, right? Or have you given them the ability to, maybe they need a voice, right? So those therapies or those folks that they
That's
need
right,
to
yeah.
communicate with, are you supporting those efforts as a co parent or another parent is really important. So, It's
Well, and
definitely a
again,
tough one.
not to interrupt you, but then the same person, the father, won't allow the girls to get therapy. So, what do you do with that? What are some other options to keep the kids feeling safe, not in the middle if you're not going to use therapeutic intervention? I don't know. Church groups, emotional support groups, things like that. But I mean, then we're still running into the issue. And I think this is where the problem lies is when you have 50-50 decision making, legal decision making with a very difficult co-parent, it's really hard to get your children any help. You're facing the opposing party all the time, trying to fight your position in the best interest of your children. And that's what I think is so frustrating when judges just immediately give 50-50 and there's a lot of signs of domestic violence or coercive control because you're never going to get anything done.
Yes, I think those very extreme situations are difficult, and I can understand where the presumptive 50-50 or the general kind of public policy of 50-50 is that. But I see far more often in my world the abuse of that control, right? That
I'm sure.
leverage of control, that decision making, or
Last decision.
yeah. So it's like the tie breaking stuff,
Mhm.
and it applies in a lot of different ways. And here's how I would coach or recommend it to anybody. If the idea for the kids is to try to de-escalate situations and find common ground that is to the kids' advantage, to their benefit. It's facilitating the other parent's exposure, bringing down that kind of scorn, right? Because some of that comes from the separation. That
Right.
emotion gets applied to the kids. And I think if you're a parent pressuring or driving your kids to feel a certain way or think a certain thing or talking about your case or
Oh god, and
even
don't question them when they come from one house to the
oh
other.
yeah,
The questioning can be a big deal too. Don't question them, don't make them feel like it's their fault, don't put them in the middle.
yeah, or using the kids to try to get information about the other parent's house, where they
Oh, yeah.
live, what the house looks like, who's there.
Mhm,
Leave that alone. Like, it's who cares? And quite frankly, in my opinion, if you're
mhm.
doing that, you're still obsessed with the other party, right? If you're asking or trying to understand
That's
what's
true.
going on at the other house, then
Mhm.
you haven't moved on. Go get yourself fixed, go move on, and let the other party live their life. I see that all the time, right? It's like those
Right.
interrogations. The kids, and by the way, they every single day they get older, they get smarter, they get more aware, and you may think you're doing yourself a favor with your children in that particular moment. You may think you're convincing them of something. I promise you, you aren't. I promise you that they see the writing on the wall. And I promise you that barring some tragedy, they're going to be adults a lot longer than they're going to be children. And
Mhm.
if you're doing it, your relationship with your kids is going to suffer as they start to see this is the person who is putting pressure on me. This is the person talking negatively about the other party. This is the person that wasn't listening to what I wanted. And they're going to hold it against you. That's a natural phenomenon of any human being. It's
Yeah.
resentment. And so,
Resentment, it builds insecurities for them that they don't need to carry.
yeah, you have to let it. It's you need to
Mhm.
be a safe place for them, live your life for them, with them, and as best you can, and try when and how you can to de-escalate the situation with the opposing party.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely try to encourage them to make it work in both households.
Yeah, I say it all the time when I talk about my case. It's like I am the biggest promoter of mom in my house
Yeah.
possible, right?
Mhm.
It's she's smart, she's talented, she's athletic, she's all the things you'd want a mom to be, right? She's in for the kids, she's on a pedestal. Like I have no say, no influence, no anything on what they think, how they feel about her or any of that. That's her responsibility. My responsibility with the boys or the kids is what I do with them and how I facilitate and how I
Mhm.
father and parent them to grow up and be respectful young men and or young women. And so it's just one of those things that I think and I see all the time, right? People subconsciously do it. They'll be coaching them and they'll tell a story or give me an example. I'm like, that's you're way down in the weeds, and what
You
you're
need to get out of there.
what you've got a problem with is only really more of a problem for you.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
No, yeah,
So,
I do that too. I think, typically the people that I coach try really, really hard to stay positive about the other parent, and I do coach them to do that, and also the downfall or what could happen if they don't stay positive about the other parent,
mhm.
especially when we're in the middle of, court cases.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Kids figure it out, and so stay in your lane, stay positive, be supportive. Don't oppose just to oppose, right? We are the adults. We were the ones that had them. We were the ones that made these decisions. Do everything in your power to keep them out of this. And this
Exactly.
comes with like even like really basic offhanded comments. Oh, your father this. Oh, your mother that.
Right.
Like, like a lot. I hear it more often than not unintentionally,
Mhm.
but it is one of those things that you know is putting pressure on the kids or putting them through an experience that y it's not your place. Keep your mouth shut, control it.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the 4-year-old and my client the 4-year-old comes home and says, "Well, daddy said that you don't love him anymore, so he doesn't wear his ring." Okay, why?
Right,
Why? Why do you have to tell a 4-year-old that?
right.
Go tell your therapist or your attorney, but don't tell your child.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I had a new party and a situation where they wanted to come to dad's and they couldn't and they were upset, and the answer was, "Well, dad's house is broken." It's like, "What does that
Oh.
mean? Daddy's house is broken. What does that mean?" Other than harm. So,
Yeah, not a good way to explain that, and I know that there's no, like, doesn't
yeah.
come with a guidebook, I mean, but do your best to just be positive about the other parent, and if you see red flags, I am a proponent of getting children therapy. I was a child therapist, family child therapist, before I became an attorney. And I do think there is some value in it. And also, parents, contact the school counselor. They are such a great resource. Yeah.
Yep. I totally agree with that.
And
Um,
even other family members, grab as many family members, get as much family support, emotional support for the children, and just know that they're confused and hurting
I
too.
that actually brings up something that I think is important to family because family is generally, they're exposed and part of the divorce. They're emotionally attached to it because they're protective of their kid or their brother
Right.
or their cousin or whatever. Be cautious and conscious and aware of those
Mhm.
people around your kids while they're on your time.
Oh,
You
what they
wanna
might
make
be
sure that
saying.
they are not doing or saying things against the other party because they've got an emotional reaction to the divorce. Um, and I know that I've seen the other side have to go through that.
Right.
And so it's really one of those things, like, you are your child's protector,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that through the lens of like keeping them from the other side. It's you're
No,
the
I get it.
protector while they're in your care to ensure that they are removed as far as possible from this experience. It wasn't their call.
Right. Exactly. No, I
So,
agree.
yeah.
Do the best you can to protect them, keep them out of the middle.
Final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot. Final thoughts are once again, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, whoever, don't talk bad about the other parent to the child and try to be positive. Everybody work together as a team. That would be in the best interest of the kiddos.
Yeah. And my final thought is all of the things we talked about are important and relevant. But the one thing we didn't say that I think we need to is this is another place having a coach can be instrumental in navigating this
Oh, yeah.
effectively with your kids, right? It's distracting you from making the wrong decisions either for or with your kids and or against the other party while they have your kids. And so making sure that you're being very conscious of where you sit in your custody battle, where your kids sit, what their needs are and how you can best serve them is
Right.
hard to do when you're emotionally attached to it. And so a coach can really work you through that process. And the reason a coach in this situation is so important is because your attorney isn't going to be your therapist. You
No.
don't want working through this process because it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and they probably aren't going to give you the advice you need on this topic.
No, this topic is not something that's their specialty, and they're not gonna have time for it.
Yep. So, like, listen, subscribe, join us. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And until next time,
We'll see you soon.
see you soon.